My name is Lila Monroe. That year, I was 11 years old, and I was left alone in my own house. And on an early summer morning, my mother dragged a large suitcase to the door, turned back to look at me, and said like she was handing off the most ordinary task in the world, "You're grown now. You can take care of yourself. I'm going to Europe for 1 month. If you need anything, order food." She pressed a crumpled $20 bill into my hand. No plan, no babysitter, no call schedule, just the lingering scent of her perfume in the hallway, and the sound of suitcase wheels rolling across the concrete floor. The door closed behind them. I stood still. The thin bill in my palm grew strangely warm. $20. Not a promise, not preparation. Just a short sentence adults use so they don't feel guilty. "I'll be fine," I said out loud. Not to reassure anyone else, but so I wouldn't start crying. I looked around the house in Maple Ridge, Naperville. No one in the kitchen. No one knew I had been left alone. No one would ask what I ate tonight. I told myself, think of it as a challenge. On the first day, I opened the cabinets and lined up the remaining canned food in neat rows. The refrigerator was emptier than I remembered. I forced the fear down, as deep as it would go. If my mother thought I was independent, then maybe she should see what real independence actually looks like. Because I knew very clearly that as the days passed, that $20 bill would disappear, the food would run out, and the silence in this house would no longer be harmless. It would grow heavy. Heavy enough to steal sleep. Heavy enough to make a child start counting every single meal. And I knew something else, too. When they came back, what they saw in this house would not look the same as when they left. My mother would stop. She would look around, and she would whisper a sentence she wouldn't manage to swallow back. "No, that's not possible. Do you want to know how being left alone with $20 at the age of 11 became the decision that made my mother pay for every choice she had ever made?" Before we go on, tell me, where are you watching this story from, and what time is it? And now, let's return to Lila, because in just a few minutes, you'll understand why an 11-year-old child was able to force adults to face the truth they had spent years avoiding. What they call an emergency is sometimes nothing more than a decoration. I picked up the plastic card my mother had left on the kitchen counter. Glossy, new, weightless. It looked more like reassurance than a solution. I entered the card number. The screen spun, then stopped. Transaction declined. I tried again, slower, more carefully. Once more. Invalid. No PIN. No activation. An emergency card that had never been ready for any emergency at all. I stood there, phone in my hand, realizing I had just touched my first real boundary of truth. Emergency, but not for me. I opened a food delivery app, chose the cheapest item, skipped the pictures so I wouldn't feel hungrier, confirmed, waited. Then the notification appeared. Payment failed. I switched to another app, then another one after that. Same result. With every rejection, my heart beat faster. The $20 in my pocket suddenly felt heavy. It was no longer money, it was time. How many meals does $20 buy? 3, 4, or fewer? I sat down on the kitchen floor. For the first time, I understood something clearly. If I didn't calculate, I would lose very quickly. So I made rules for myself. Slice the bread thinner than usual. Spread just enough peanut butter to cover the surface. Eat slowly. Drink more water. Count every bite. I called it a game, because if I called it by its real name, I would panic. I organized the pantry like a scoreboard. Each can was one turn. Each meal was a subtraction. I even smiled at myself, thinking that someday, telling this story might sound interesting, but a stomach growling in the middle of the night doesn't know how to joke. And neither does this house. That night, I stayed awake for a long time, not because of noise, but because of silence. Silence loud enough to hear my body growing weaker. Silence long enough to realize I wasn't playing anymore. I was enduring. And when I stood up in the dark, so dizzy I had to hold on to the wall, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was no longer a challenge. This was survival. The next morning, my doorbell rang and no one had told me that anyone was coming. Some truths don't need to be spoken out loud, they only need to be recorded. I opened my mother's laptop just to check the time. The screen lit up. Emails filled the display in long, unread rows, one after another. Every subject line sounded urgent. Meetings, deadlines, projects, things that needed attention, but none of them were me. I scrolled down. My mother's name repeated itself in the sender line. My name did not appear once. No message asking what I had eaten. No line asking if I was okay. Only flight schedules, meeting calendars, and apologies sent to other people for late replies. I closed the laptop, not angry, not crying, just seeing one thing more clearly. This absence was not accidental. The glow from the screen cast a pale yellow light onto the ceiling. The laptop fan hummed softly, steadily, as if it didn't care that there was a child left alone in this house. I looked at the clock in the corner of the screen. Almost noon, and still nothing for me. I took an old school notebook from the drawer. The first page was blank. I wrote one word in large letters at the top of the page: evidence. Below it, I wrote the date, the remaining money, what I had eaten, what was gone. I wrote without emotion, like copying notes, as if clarity alone would make the truth stand on its own. Day 3. No phone call, no caretaker. The emergency card didn't work. I added the times. I wrote down even the empty spaces. 8 o'clock in the morning, no message. 12:30, no call. The numbers sat still on the page, but they spoke very clearly. No one was checking whether I was okay. I didn't know what I would do with it. But when the pen stopped moving, my chest felt a little lighter. At least, if someone asked, I wouldn't have to remember in a panic. I had written it down. I opened my phone's camera. I held the phone in my hand for a long time. My finger hovered over the record button. I was afraid that if I pressed it, everything would become more real than I was ready to face. The screen reflected my face, smaller than I expected. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes. I didn't prepare any words. I just spoke. Day 3. I whispered, I'm still alone. I turned the camera toward the kitchen. The refrigerator was almost empty. The counter was clean in a way that felt frightening. The card doesn't work. I continued. I ate my last meal last night. I paused, swallowed. No crying, no begging. If someone ever sees this, I said, it means someone finally asked. I turned off the camera, saved the video, locked the screen. I wasn't sure I wanted anyone to see it, but I knew one thing for certain: I didn't want this to disappear. That night, I opened the notebook again, added another line. No one checked, no one asked. And that's when I understood surviving was not enough. If I just waited for them to come back, everything could be brushed off. One apology, one excuse, and then everything would continue as before. I didn't want to explain what hunger felt like. I didn't want to prove that I hadn't imagined any of it. So I kept writing, kept saving, didn't leave a single day blank. I didn't call it revenge. I wasn't writing to shame anyone. I was writing because if one day I was no longer here, no one would be able to say they didn't know. I called it self-defense. And for the first time since the door closed behind them, I knew I was doing the right thing. The very next morning, Another adult started asking questions, and this time, I didn't stay silent. Some moments aren't loud, but they are enough for a child to understand that silence can also kill. Day 4. The house was still standing there, but it no longer felt like a place to come back to. The only sound was the wall clock. Tick, tock, like a countdown. I realized I was no longer afraid of the dark. I was afraid that no one knew I was in the dark. No calls, no messages, not a single question. Have you eaten? This silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like a sealed room the longer you stayed inside, the less air there was. And for the first time, I thought something very strange. If something happened to me, who would know? I opened the drawer of my desk, pulled out an old notebook, the pages yellowed, the corners of the cover worn soft. I don't know why, but I didn't write a diary. I wrote one single word, in large letters. On the first page, evidence proof. My hand shook slightly as I underlined it, not because I was scared, but because for the first time, I understood remembering was not enough. Under that word, I wrote short bullet points, one by one, 11 years old, home alone, $20, no caretaker, no phone calls, no emotion, no complaints, just facts, bare, cold. After I finished writing, I sat there for a long time. Something inside me had shifted, as if I was no longer just the child who had been left behind. I was documenting. From that day on, each day added another line. Day 4, half a loaf of bread left. Day 5, dry cereal. No milk. Day 6, dizzy when standing up. I didn't write hungry. I wrote no fresh food left. I didn't write sad. I wrote no one contacted me. Each line was like a small nail, hammering the truth into the page, so that later, no one could pull it out and say, "You exaggerated." Sometimes I stopped mid-sentence, asked myself, what am I doing? Then another thought cut in. If I don't write it, the adults will write it for me, and they will write a version that benefits them. That evening, I turned on my phone. The light from the screen washed over my face paler than I remembered. I didn't set the phone up, didn't look for a good angle. I just pressed record. Day 4, I said quietly. My voice sounded strange, like it didn't belong to me. I'm still here alone. The card doesn't work. I ate the last thing yesterday. I paused, swallowed. If someone sees this video, it means someone finally asked what happened. I turned the camera off. My heart was beating very fast. I wasn't sure I wanted this video to be seen, but I was sure of one thing: it had to exist. I didn't know who would be the first person to see those words, or that video. But I knew this: when that happened, nothing would ever be able to go back to the way it was before. Some doors open not because you knock, but because someone finally realizes you've been silent for too long. The doorbell rang near noon. A short, sharp sound. Unfamiliar. I froze in the middle of the kitchen, my hand still gripping the edge of the table. In my head, every possible scenario raced by: a salesperson, a wrong address, or not for me. The doorbell rang again. Then 3 soft knocks followed. I thought about pretending no one was home. If I stayed silent long enough, maybe they would leave. Then another thought surfaced clear. Cold. If this was the only person knocking today, then I didn't want to miss it. I walked to the door, opened it slightly, just enough to see outside. Standing on the porch was a man in a light gray jacket, a school badge neatly pinned to his chest. He smiled gently, unhurried. "Hello, Lila. I'm Mr. Harris, the school counselor." His voice was low, slow, not probing. It took me a few seconds to realize he wasn't standing in a familiar hallway, with a notice board behind him. He was just, "Here. I've tried calling your parents several times," he continued. No one answered. I opened the door a little wider. No explanation. No apology. "May I come in?" he asked, as if I had the right to say no. I stepped aside, and for the first time in many days, an adult walked into this house. Mr. Harris didn't speak right away. He looked around. The kitchen table was bare. A few dishes sat unevenly in the sink. The refrigerator hummed softly when he opened it, then closed it. No questions were needed. The absence in this house wasn't loud. It was present, like an old smell that couldn't be hidden. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, gestured for me to sit across from him. I did. "Where are your parents?" he asked, still looking straight at me, not forcing anything. "Europe," I answered. "For 1 month." He paused. 1 month his voice didn't rise, but something shifted. "And who is here with you?" I looked down at my hands, then looked up. Just me. That moment lasted longer than I expected. No one rushed to fill the silence. Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair. "How long have you been alone?" "Almost 1 week. Do you have enough food?" I gave a small smile. Not because it was funny. They left $20. He looked at me for a long time. Not the kind of look adults use when they're searching for an excuse. "Lila," he said slowly, "you know this isn't okay, right?" I nodded. "I know. Do you want help?" I thought about the notebook in the drawer, the word evidence written large on the first page. "Yes," I said, "but I want everything to be seen exactly as it is." If you're still listening to this story, if you haven't left, and you're still here with me at this moment, leave a comment with the number 1, so I know you're still walking alongside my story. Just a single number. But it says this: you listened, and you understood. Mr. Harris nodded once, pulled out his phone. "Then we'll start by making sure you're safe," he said. "And after that, we'll make the adults responsible for their choices." I knew, in that exact moment, that this story had left the house and it would no longer belong to just me. Some meetings don't need raised voices, but they are enough to leave every excuse with nowhere to stand. The car pulled up in front of the house in the late afternoon. The sound of the car door closing felt too familiar, as if there had never been a gap at all. My mother walked in first. Her coat still carried the smell of the airport. She smiled out of habit, the smile she used to end difficult questions. "Are you okay?" The question landed on the kitchen floor. Light, touching nothing. My father followed. Set his keys on the table. Didn't look at me. He talked about the flight, the luggage, how tired they were. The house was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said was already there. Mr. Harris stood near the kitchen counter. Didn't step forward, didn't step back. He was simply present. My mother noticed him. Her smile stalled for a beat. "What's going on here?" she asked. Her voice stayed calm. But her eyes began to scan the room. I stood still. For the first time, I didn't need to prepare an answer. Mr. Harris pulled out a chair, sat down, gestured for everyone else to do the same. On the kitchen table, he placed my notebook, opened it to the very first page. Evidence. No one spoke. My mother leaned forward. "You wrote all this." Not quite a question, more like an attempt to soften it. I nodded. Mr. Harris didn't explain. He simply turned the pages. Dates, meals, remaining money, no words written in red ink, no shaking lines. My father cleared his throat softly. We left money. There was a card. Mr. Harris placed the unactivated card on the table. Beside it, he set my phone paused on the first recorded video. "We're not here to argue," he said slowly. "We're here to confirm one thing." He looked directly at them. Lila was home alone, without enough food, without supervision. No one argued right away, because the house had already spoken for itself. My mother was the first to respond. She straightened her back, kept her voice steady. "We just needed a break," she said. "We work all year. She's grown. We trusted her." Trusted. A word that sounds beautiful when spoken over a full table. My father nodded along. "When we were young, kids were much more independent. We didn't think things would go this far." Mr. Harris didn't interrupt. He let those words fall onto the table, lying beside the notebook. I looked at my mother, at the way she chose her words carefully, not to understand me, but to protect her image. No one intended to harm her. She finished. "It was just an unfortunate decision." I inhaled. For the first time in this kitchen, I spoke before anyone asked. "I don't need anyone to intend to harm me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't shake. "I just needed adults to stay." No one interrupted. I didn't call anyone. I continued. Because I was taught that if I needed help, it meant I wasn't good enough. I placed my hand on the notebook, didn't open it. What's written here isn't to make anyone look bad. It's here so no one can say they didn't know. My mother looked at me for a long time. For the first time, her eyes didn't search for a way to fix the story. "How far do you want this to go?" she asked, as if it were her choice. I shook my head. "This isn't in my hands anymore," I said. "It went too far the moment this house stayed silent for 1 week." Mr. Harris stood up. His voice lowered. "The next step will not be just a family conversation." The kitchen door remained open. Outside air poured in cold and real. And I knew, right then, that whatever came next could no longer be called a misunderstanding. When the truth has left the house, it no longer needs emotion to keep moving forward. The next morning, the kitchen no longer smelled like coffee. There was only the sound of rustling paper and low, measured voices. A woman I had never met sat across from me. She introduced herself briefly. Not warm, not distant, just enough for me to understand this was no longer a private conversation. She asked very specific questions. Time, dates, who was home, who wasn't. I answered each one. No more, no less. My parents sat on the other side of the table. For the first time, they didn't control the rhythm of the conversation. They didn't decide when to speak or when things ended. The truth, once it steps outside, no longer asks anyone for permission. The neighbors began to know. No one asked directly, but I could feel it. The way they looked at the house, the way they lingered a little longer by the door. Mrs. Collins came over that afternoon. She didn't bring questions. She brought a bag of food and a heavy look in her eyes. "You can stay at my place for a few days," she said. Not an offer, a preparation. My mother stood beside her. She didn't object. She didn't agree. She stayed silent. I understood something very clearly. Once the story is told in front of others, it no longer belongs to the image of a perfect family. It becomes something people have already seen. The days that followed had no climax, only waiting. I stayed at Mrs. Collins's house. Her living room smelled like soap and old wood. At night, I heard adults speaking quietly in the kitchen, words that felt unfamiliar: evaluation, temporary, supervision. No one explained where everything was heading, and strangely, I didn't ask. For the first time in many days, I didn't have to time my meals. I didn't have to count money, but I didn't feel relieved either. I felt like I was standing between two shores, a place where going back was no longer possible, and what lay ahead didn't have a name yet. That evening, I lay on an unfamiliar bed. The ceiling was lower. The light was more yellow. There was no familiar ticking clock. My mother's phone lay on the living room table. It didn't vibrate. It didn't light up. I heard cars passing outside. One stopped in front of my old house, then drove on. And suddenly, I realized even though this was happening because of me, I was no longer the one controlling it. Adults were talking. Rules were operating. Decisions were being written down somewhere not in my notebook. And for the first time, waiting was no longer hunger. It was knowing that things were being decided beyond my reach. On the third afternoon, the woman returned. She spoke slowly, clearly. For now, Lila will not be alone. We need more time to evaluate. My mother inhaled softly. My father lowered his head. There were no tears, no arguments, just a decision placed on the table gently, but impossible to lift back up. I looked at them, not angry, not pitying, just realizing, for the first time, that everything no longer revolved around whether I was well behaved. It revolved around a different question. Was I safe? When I lifted my bag and walked out of the house, I knew one thing. This was not the end. It was simply the moment the story gained witnesses. Not every ending is loud. Some endings are simply safer than yesterday. The room at Mrs. Collins's house is smaller than my old one. Low ceiling, a window that looks out onto an old maple tree. In the morning, sunlight doesn't flood the room. It pauses on the windowsill, just enough to let me know the day has begun. There is no lock clicking behind me, no sound of a suitcase rolling away. I place my backpack in the corner of the room, not to stay temporarily, just to stay. For the first time in many days, I sleep through the night. No dreams, no jolting awake in the dark, afraid I've forgotten something important. In the morning, the kitchen smells like toast, the sound of boiling water. A plate is set in front of me without anyone asking. Is this enough for you? I eat slowly. Not because I'm afraid it will run out, but because I can. At noon, I do my homework at an old wooden table. In the afternoon, I go into the backyard and pick up dry leaves. Small things so small I never used to notice them. But it's those small things that make me realize something normal is not something that just exists on its own. It's the result of someone staying. There's a message on my phone from my mother. Not many words. Not long. Are you okay? 2 question marks. Like a habit. I stare at the screen for a long time. Not angry. And not in a hurry to reply. This distance isn't a punishment. It's there so things don't snap back too soon. A few days later, my father sends another message. He talks about process, about the steps that need to be taken. I read it. Then I set the phone down. Some relationships need time to be silent in the right way. I used to think being strong meant enduring better, not needing anyone, being able to handle everything on your own. Now I know strength isn't being alone. Strength is knowing when you need safety, knowing when you need someone close, and not feeling ashamed of that. I didn't win. I'm not completely at peace yet, but I am in a place where, when I wake up each morning, I don't have to ask myself, will I be abandoned again today? And that is enough to begin again. Some stories don't end with victory. They end when you no longer have to prove anything. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of hunger, not because of worry. Light slipped through the curtains, gentle enough not to startle me awake. The kitchen was quiet. No suitcase wheels dragging across the floor. No rushed instructions. I poured myself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and realized something. For the first time, I didn't need to prepare an answer for anyone. I used to think silence meant maturity, not asking, not demanding, not being a burden. I learned how to manage on my own, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. But silence, when it lasts too long, stops being a skill. It becomes a room with no windows. And I lived in that room long enough to forget that I also had the right to be heard. Maybe this story isn't really about a child who was left behind. Maybe it's about an evening when you chose silence to keep the peace. A time you nodded, even though you were already exhausted. A relationship that only works when you're the one carrying everything. If you've ever been the one who is always fine, know this: you are not weak. You have simply been carrying too much. Truth doesn't always destroy everything. Sometimes, it just puts you back where you belong. And if, somewhere in what you've just heard, you saw a part of yourself, then maybe this story has been speaking about you too. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can share with you more meaningful and valuable stories about life. See you in the next story.